Hello, film friends, friends of film, and everyone in between. Welcome to the Film Folklore Podcast. I am Jed Props, and I am joined today by Justin Sound.
Hello.
Joe is still traveling. According to the GPS tracker Justin installed in Joe's official Carmen Sandiego dossier, he is all the way in the Galapagos Islands with IP freely. So jealous. Zoe went to retrieve Chris from the latest hole he fell down, and now she's stuck there too. Wah, wah. All right. Well, anyway. Hello there, Cinefriend. How are you doing today?
Good.
So I wanted to do something a little different today, and you know me and my segues, not the drivable kind, but I wanted to do something new that will tie in with our guest, and we'll just kind of turn into a discussion since we had last minute changes we had to adapt to today. But basically, I pulled this information officially from a 2019 Esquire article, and it's all about continuity errors. So I guess we should real quickly say a continuity error, just for layman terms, is if you ever notice maybe an actor has a watch on in a scene and then the camera cuts and there's a new angle and then suddenly the watch isn't there. That's a continuity error. They come in a lot of different ways, and it'll make sense here as we explore some of these.
Another big iconic one is cigarettes, right?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I'm good. Okay. So I had not even fathomed that when I was putting this together, and I should have, because I used to have to deal with that a lot. Luckily, we are seeing less and less smoking, right. So it's not something I have to deal with as much. But oh my God, cutting cigarettes at different lengths to light them to make sure that we are copying our ash and cigarette shrinking. Oh my God, that used to be such a headache. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. But it is true. I mean, that used to be a regular thing we had to do by depending on if the actor actually smoked or didn't smoke, there's herbal cigarettes and stuff. But I mean, sometimes it's just straight up, we were buying cartons of real cigarettes and then cutting them up to make them set ready to, what a weird world we work in. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to bring up these particular shows one by one, and a lot of them had an infamous continuity error. Some of these shows had more than one major gaffe, but I'm kind of just focusing on the highly discussed ones. Okay. So let's see if you're familiar with any of these. And I'll try to get pics for the episode page if we ever get that up and running. But we'll start with probably the most recent one in recent memory. And if I say Game of Thrones, what do you think I'm going to bring up?
The coffee cup.
The coffee cup. How dare they? And
those prop guys.
It was the on-set dresser, I swear.
Just kidding.
No, and we do talk about it a little bit in our interview later, but there were some other things. I knew about the water bottle, which is at the feet when there's like that little council thing in season 7.
Right. So that's not the same episode, right? As
no.
The coffee cup. Is the coffee cup the last episode, or is it like the second to last episode or something like that?
I feel like the coffee cup was earlier that season. That whole season was the season of out of fucks. That was,
yeah, right.
I mean, it just looked like everyone was checked out. Because suddenly you're having these like major issues. But there were 2 in here that I had never noticed before. And one of them was in season 5. I think it's Stannis is it when Stannis was dying? No, he made it further than 5, didn't he?
You're going to have to remind me.
I know, it's been a minute.
Who is Stannis?
He was the one, he was the loser that was vying for the right to the throne that nobody cared about. Okay. That was like the older guy.
He had like a tiny castle.
Yeah, he had the younger brother that was the gay brother that got killed earlier on.
Yeah, okay.
He had the Red Witch
yes.
making the weird baby thing.
Right. The sailor. He was on boats all the time.
Oh, yeah. And the Onion Knight, that guy used to be with him. Mm-hmm. So he's laying up against a tree. I think it's after the battle. It was after a big battle. It wasn't when he died. That's right. It was after like a major battle, and his army got decimated. But apparently, as he's leaning up against this tree, you can see a charging cord near his leg, I guess for his phone that was hiding in his pocket.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole other thing in season 4 involving a necklace that was out of place, but not worth going into. So, and you know, that's a major show with a lot of money, which is a lot of the mysteries of these things is that you'll see a lot of times these aren't like tiny shows on limited shoestring budgets. These are people, I mean, post-production budget alone should be a lot. Now, granted, some of these that I'm going to bring up are older in time, such as the next one, Pretty Woman. And I've only seen Pretty Woman once because I'm a guy and I don't care that much about the movie.
Okay.
But when Julia and Richard are having breakfast in the hotel, she is eating a croissant. The camera cuts away to Richard Gere, and when it cuts back to her, her croissant has magically turned into a pancake.
Oh, gotcha.
And that's props, and that's a pretty big one. I don't know how a mistake like that can happen, but that's a weird one.
Okay. You say it's props.
Oh, we're the food people typically.
Right. But, I mean, could it have been? Well, yeah, okay.
Now, it's possible that the pancakes were just dressed in evidence, but the croissants was in front of her. And as they cut camera and the actors go away, and then, you know, the camera's moving around.
Right.
And things get shuffled and then returned to place. It's possible that when she got back there, that Julia herself just grabbed a pancake, not thinking about it.
That's still on props, right?
It is in the sense of like once they say cut, it's like I would go to the script supervisor and be like, she was eating croissant, by the way, before that. And then depending on your relationship with the actor, actress, and how nice they are, you can figure out a tactful way to go like, hey there, was it a pancake you were eating or was it the croissant? I don't remember what you were eating in the last take. You know, I don't know. Maybe there's a better way to say it, but yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one because then you got to tiptoe around the actor being wrong if that's what happened,
right?
You know, but yeah, I wasn't there. I couldn't tell you exactly. All I know is that croissant became a pancake magically.
Yeah.
So the next one is from the Quantum of Solace, the James Bond movie. And I don't expect you to get this because I did not see this, but I included it because it's an AD related gaffe. And if Chris or Joe were here, they could definitely speak a little bit to it. But there's a brief moment where a man is supposed to be street sweeping behind Daniel Craig. So Daniel Craig's in the foreground. I think he's on the phone. And the man in the background is supposed to be street sweeping. But if you go and look, he's sweeping the broom, he's sweeping the air. Like the broom's not on the ground. And this is not...
He was pantomiming.
Yeah. So this is not technically what I might consider a continuity error, but at the same time, I wanted to include it because it still is pertaining with our guest today. And unfortunately, Chris couldn't be with us and Joe, but I wanted them to kind of speak to when a background makes a mistake like that. Because normally what happens is that as the camera is rolling, those ADs are looking in monitors and they're watching the background. I mean, that's their number, you know, the second, he's or she, they're watching the background. That's because they just set all the background up. You know, they're like, hey, props, what do you have? We have this broom. And it's like, all right, let's get this guy street sweeping here. And then they're watching the take and they're watching the crosses to make sure, you know, do we need to, spread out the crosses more of the people coming back and forth? So they're looking at all that. So here it is. James Bond movie, giant budget. Background man is sweeping air. How does that make it to a final cut?
So what's James Bond doing in the scene? Or
I think he's on a phone in the foreground.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So I'm going to speculate something here. And I was kind of just joking about the pantomiming, but I could imagine a world where they do a take. He's actually sweeping the street. It's quiet enough to where you can hear that all the way over there. And then somebody has the bright idea to just say, all right, well, let's just pantomime it then. And he just goes way too high with it.
I mean, who knows? Because we weren't there. So the next one is Stranger Things. And this one, I'm not going to have you guess because, I mean, what are 5 seasons of that show?
Yeah, right.
But this one that I wanted to mention, I wanted to bring it up because it's an obscure one. But again, it kind of applies with our guest today and how this kind of stuff can come up. And these things become sort of creative discretions. But basically, when the Demogorgon Dungeons and Dragons piece is introduced, they are story-wise in the year 1983. That character piece is a real piece, but it didn't come out until the following year in 84. Now, normally, only a super nerd is going to know something like that. I wanted to bring it up because it gives examples of how we can cheat time sometimes. This happens a lot, and it's usually a creative thing where, like, maybe for me, I would say, hey, I did my research. This is what I found. And you might encounter a director that's like, oh, thanks for telling me. And you might also encounter a director that goes, fuck it, who cares? There's 5 D&D nerds? Whatever, so who knows? But it's just something that I would want to bring up because it is technically, it's not necessarily a continuity error exactly, but it is
a story continuity, right?
Of real life and fiction. And when you have a story that is supposed to be embedded in real life, then for me, I feel like it's my due diligence to say, I did my research, I looked this stuff up, do with what you will with this information,
right?
But that's just, that's how I've operated over the years. And sometimes they care, sometimes they don't. You never know. But again, that you want to make sure that information gets across. There's just so many examples of the kind of mistakes that can crop up when we're watching shows. There are many factors that can contribute to missing errors, like maybe it's a failure in editing, maybe it's ADs missing something that a dumb BG did. It could be laziness. There's too many things to keep track of, maybe, and someone on camera, like a BG goes rogue. Who knows?
Which does happen.
But let's see, is there anything like that you can think of off the top of your head of like other shows, like maybe a show that you watched and you noticed something was mysteriously out of place, or you kind of did a double take, like, did I just see that right?
It's funny enough, the wife and I watched the new Aquaman movie last night.
Not a small budget.
Not at all. And I don't think this was a production continuity issue. And I don't know what it was exactly. It seemed to me like it was a coloring issue, but it would have been a coloring continuity issue.
Right.
And my wife noticed it. I didn't even notice it at first, but the color of his shirt changes briefly.
Oh, weird.
From like a very, very dark gray to a very, very light gray.
Huh.
And then back.
Oh, okay. That is weird.
Yeah.
That feels like a post thing.
It's got to be.
Right?
It's the same shirt. I mean, as far as what it looks like, unless it was a different color shirt, but it doesn't seem like that. It seems like it was like a coloring thing. Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
I have not seen any Aquaman iteration, old or new.
We felt like making fun of a movie last night.
Feels like a good one to do. Now, I say all of this, I bring up all of this because it whether it's continuity or kind of the similar one-offs that I brought up, there is someone who on set, and they have a lot on their plate, they usually would have to wear a lot of hats, and they're basically, I don't want to say in charge, that's not the right way to say it, but a lot of this continuity and the consistency and these kind of notes and things falls on their shoulders oftentimes. And that's who we have here today, is a script supervisor. And continuity is only one aspect of their difficult world, and we're going to get into all that. But we are going to talk a lot of continuity because, well, I do props. But we have a very great guest, and I've known him for a while, really great guy. And without further ado, let's welcome David Scripty. Welcome, David. Hi, David, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get going too far, if anyone is hearing any kind of fun, random background noise, kind of like you're listening to the background of the song What's Going On, that's actually a potential parade outside because we're in New Orleans. So I hope y'all enjoy that. So I'm gonna kick this off with a general question that's kind of your preference. So oftentimes you get nicknamed Scripty. Are you okay with that nickname? Because some nicknames, some people take maybe not offense, but they prefer like the official title kind of thing.
Yeah, I personally don't take any offense to it. But with that said, I can't speak for all script supervisors out there.
Of course.
I think there is a sentiment among some that it's a bit of a pejorative, especially as a job that is primarily female. I think there are some script supervisors that feel like it's like the job equivalent of cutie. On the flip side, I have no problem with crafty for craft services or props for property or transpo for transportation. So it doesn't bother me. The exception is there's one of us on any given movie. And when that title gets substituted for your name, that's, I think, a little offensive. So if you're on a movie where, the director or an actor yells out like, "Hey, Scripty, by that point, like, you should know my name." And it makes some sense with other departments. You might call out props because there's 4 props people.
Right.
And any one of them can respond. But provided you're on a movie that's going for any length of time, know the person's name. That said, Scripty versus script soup versus script supervisor, I personally am not offended by any of them.
I kind of agree with you because there have been times where I've been alone on a set, and someone has referred to me as props. And it is, now that you say that, I'm like, wait, you should know my name by now. We've been together for like 2 months.
Yeah, I can't imagine an actor yelling out like, "Hey, director, what's the thing? Hey, DP, am I in the right spot?" With an exception, I guess a day player who doesn't know anybody yet, I would be not offended.
Right.
But I've had directors do it where we've been working together. I've been sitting by their side for a month. And I'm like, man, learn my name.
You know what you should do is maybe passive aggressively put on, which props can provide for you, but a "hello, my name is" tag that you just kind of like wear one day if you're in that situation where you don't call any attention to it or anything. It's there, and if someone says it, you go like, "Oh, what? Oh, it's just my name." Why is it weird?
This relates to something we were talking about right before we started about a director taking Polaroids of crew so he could remember their names. I did work with a director on TV once who on her first day in asked that all of the crew wear "hello, my name is" name tags, which there was mixed feelings amongst the crew about this because on the one hand it feels kind of, like you're back in middle school. But on the other hand, I like that this director knew, like, I'm in a new environment where I'm not going to know 80 people. I want to call them by their name. And after day 1, I'll know their names. Which, if it was just me wearing a "hello, my name is," maybe there's a joke to be made by virtue of it's a continuity thing. But I'd be hesitant to be the only person doing it.
Speaking of continuity, we are going to go deep into that.
Oh, dear.
But let's see. So let's just start with your background. So where are you from originally?
I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Nice. The Red Stick. And from an early age, were you already kind of interested in the film TV world, or just did the media attract you, or was there something you just tripped backwards into? Like, how did your interest get there?
No, I was one of the lucky, crazy people that when I was 5 years old, told my parents I want to make movies, and they're both chemical engineers, and they thought, oh, he's going to grow out of this, and maybe I just stuck with it by virtue of being stubborn. But since I was a young kid, I knew that making movies was what I wanted to do.
That's
and
really
I've
cool.
kind of never wavered in that, which again makes me crazy fortunate.
Did you make home movies and stuff when you were young?
A little bit. Nothing spectacular. There's nothing that you would look at and be like, this kid shows promise.
In all honesty, I've seen some of Spielberg's home movies from when I was a kid. It's not exactly something to write home about, but I think just the fact that anyone's making the effort is showing the interest, because it's not like anyone's going to pick up a camera and just automatically my lighting source needs to adjust a little bit.
Right. To that, it's funny you mentioned Spielberg. Watching The Fabelmans, which was his semi-autobiographical movie. It is such an exact mirror in many, many ways of my, I was raised Jewish in Baton Rouge, which is pretty similar to what Spielberg's experience was. And very much leaned into just narrative as a thing that I was obsessed with. And now you chart our careers, and they're identical.
Yeah, ish. I mean, he's made a little bit more money He's had maybe one movie of merit. It's hard to name.
Or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One or two.
There was a fish movie. Can't remember. Anyway, now, just because we know each other a little bit, I know a little bit as far as your interests, and I think you, amongst a lot of people that I've met, have a very good cinematic knowledge. And in fact, when we were talking just before we were recording, you brought up a movie I'd never heard of called The TV Set.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, and which I think is a testament to the knowledge that I think that you have. Like, would you consider yourself a cinephile, or is that something that you like to hang your hat on, or is it just you naturally absorb?
I've been, I grew up in the advent of the DVD era, and anytime I had money that I could spend, it was on DVDs. And that, again, it's this pride thing for me of like, once I dive in with it, I'm going to stick with it forever. So even now, like in my house, you walk in the front door and there's these two walls that are just, wall to wall DVDs and Blu-rays.
Oh, that's really cool.
I am watching pretty much everything I can all the time. And my memory is phenomenal for anything movie related. If you try and show me how an engine works, or like even just like sports or music or like that, I can't remember for the life of me who the drummer is in my favorite bands. And I have no idea who plays in any position on any team or even what sport that team is in. But anything movie related, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a survival thing of like, I want to go into this industry forever, but it all just sticks. And I love that.
I know. I definitely can relate to that. I have a very similar memory that I just usually refer to it as a trivial knowledge, but it's that thing of like, you probably have heard friends or family say it before, but it's like, you should go on a game show kind of thing. And you're like, well, I mean, if the categories were right, but...
That's the advantage of your thing being movies, is because movies have such a broad, breadth of content or of subject matter. If you are just really good at remembering movies, that means you know little bits of everything else. Whereas we all know somebody who's obsessed with, let's say football, who can tell you like who threw the winning throw in a game from 1976 against what team. They've got just as much knowledge as like you or I do. It's just theirs is focused on a different specialty. And what's lucky for us when it comes to bar trivia is that our specialty happens to weirdly include some other subspecialties.
I think this is just a guess, of course, but you know how like you can be a visual person or an audio person, as far as how you retain. Some people are better with numbers, kind of thing. That there's something I think in that trivia world of, say, the entertainment world, because it's so visual. If you're a visual learner, it kind of helps plug it in. Where, like, I like certain sports, but don't ask me stats because now we're talking numbers, and I can ballpark things. Where if you say something like who had the most touchdowns last year, and I'd be like, I feel like this guy had a lot of touchdowns, but I wouldn't know. It'd just be an educated guess. But then if you say something silly like, how many Oscars does Dustin Hoffman have? And then you're going like, I think he's 3. Like I could be off. But
I think maybe more so even than visual, it's that it's put into a narrative context. And I think you see this in nonfiction books now, like Malcolm Gladwell's books are all very good at taking, fairly heady, fairly statistics-based figures and putting them into the context of a story, which then allows us to internalize it and remember it. It's what the news often does, for better or for worse, is take a fact and then represent it as part of a personal story about a person, and therefore we retain it better. So I wonder if for me, it's in film, like whether or not I'm remembering like some bizarre statistic or some like, fact about, let's say, like the Rwandan genocide. It's because I saw Hotel Rwanda. It's the only reason I know that. And I wonder if the reason I remember it is because I was emotionally invested in that as a story, and therefore the information stuck.
Oh, that's interesting. What I'm kind of driving us towards is that we are both in very detail-oriented positions, and I'm just curious. I'll have to try to remember to ask other people in related fields, but if it's that kind of skill set that we've kind of developed over the years, which is also what plays into us having an attention for detail when we're working, when we're looking at what you're watching monitors. If I'm lucky, I can see monitors. A lot of times we're we're in the crowd in the like a peanut gallery at the back end of a tent maybe, where we're trying to get a glimpse at a monitor, or we're stealing the hair and makeup monitors because they usually have one. But it's that thing of we're all relying on each other to make sure we're not missing things when it comes to, say, continuity, for example. Let's see, what it would be: hair, makeup, costumes, props, the on-set dresser, and ultimately you at the kind of, if it was a pyramid, you'd be at the top of that pyramid of making sure that we have consistency, we're not missing anything. And
yes and no. I don't, I suppose I'm at the top of the pyramid if the pyramid is charting how focused specifically on continuity anyone is. I would almost argue that I'm sort of at the bottom of a inverted pyramid, which is, I once heard somebody describe script supervising as it must be very stressful because you have to make sure everything's right. Like costumes is just focused on costumes. You're focused on making sure everything's okay. And I think a lot of script supervisors do get, stressed about that. But on the flip side, someone once pointed out to me, your position is like being the goalkeeper on a soccer team. And yes, you want to block any shot on goal. However, it's also the rest of the team's job to prevent there from being shots on goal. If there is a shot on goal, somebody else has made a mistake or that shot would never be taken. And yes, hopefully you can prevent it from going in. But if you don't, you're not alone in having made that error. So to that end, like I'm the most focused on continuity. However, I'm also just a safety net. Every other department is prioritizing their continuity, and I'm just kind of trying to keep an eye out for anything that falls through the cracks. So frankly, like at the end of the day, like there have been days on shows where I don't say a thing, where no one has a question for me because they're all on top of their own stuff fully, and they nail it. And I sit there and I make notes. So I agree with you completely that it's very much a collaborative effort. And we are all like just out there to kind of, watch each other's backs and make sure that everything comes together as cohesively as possible. I
really like that soccer analogy. And when you put it into that kind of context, like I think you're absolutely correct. There is definitely a thing where above all people, you need to have all the notes as they come, because you being blindsided, I feel, is worse than anyone else in our continuity world getting blindsided because, like you said, safety net. What would be like, do you have any examples of times where you've had to adapt or you've had to kind of figure out where you're organically maybe learning where I'm like, why is this happening this way? This isn't what we talked about.
Yeah. So a question of like adapting focus and how much there is for a script supervisor to track. I think there is too much for any one person to track. When you bear in mind, you are looking at physical continuity. It's, is the coffee cup in the right hand or the left hand? Is the hair parted the right way? That's continuity within a scene. There's also continuity across the story. Do they have, are they walking into the room with the same backpack that they left the previous room with? Or just, if later on in the movie they're going to reference something at their house, does the house actually look the way it was supposed to? That's kind of continuity on a macro level. Then there's geographical continuity, which is the blocking going to match? Are they turning the same way? And also, are you getting, the angles that you need, the coverage that you need so that it cuts together in a way that makes sense for the scene? It's a tremendous amount of stuff. On top of that, the actors are saying their lines. And the famous thing is an actor forgets their line, they call out line, you want to be ready to shout that out. All of that combined is literally too much for one person to focus on at the same time. And so I think what happens is, like you ask about like adapting your approach. I think every single show is different. And what you figure out pretty quickly is like, where are the weaknesses? Like going back to the soccer analogy, if you know that like your left defense guy is not the best, you're going to be more ready to drift to that side to protect that side of the goal. So if you have actors that are consistently missing lines, during their scenes, you have to be on script because they're going to call out line. And the worst thing in the world for a script supervisor is an actor calls out line, and right as you were making a note about some different camera move, and then you feel like the kid being called on in class that just doesn't have the answer, and it's incredibly embarrassing. Everyone waits for you. The director looks over and says, they're asking for a line. You're like, yeah, I know that. Thank you. I'm figuring. So if the actors are really professional and they know their lines, you just kind of learn that like those actors, Scott Bakula in NCIS, you don't have to be reading along with Scott. He's never going to call for a line. He knows his lines, which means you're more freed up to focus on other things. By the same token, if you're working with a DP that cares about eyeline but isn't necessarily the best at internalizing it, you know that you have to pay closer attention to making sure that you've got all the moments in the coverage so that it will cut together. You also learn what any given director cares about or doesn't. And to that end, like what they don't care about is almost as important as what they do. For example, like the infamous thing is a piece of food switching hands. If you're shooting close-ups and you're going to be above their hands, you arguably don't need to worry about it. And the last thing you want to do is get in an actor's head when they're emoting and all of a sudden they're worried about where they're holding the coffee cup. Like that's not the performance they want to be giving. So in terms of like tracking all this stuff, I kind of, over the course of the first few days, I watch and just kind of assess where the weaknesses are. If, any given department is chronically like making a mistake, I just pay closer attention to that department. The good news is, especially on a show with a budget where there's playback, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, let me check. Because at the very, very least, if someone walks up and says, hey, I think that in that take, one of the buttons had come undone. What take was that? At the very least, you know what the different shots were, what the angles are. And so you know where to turn to your playback person and say, hey, can you pull up, 23 Apple take 2 and watch it back? Often with, the costumer right there. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. The advantage is being able to know then where to get that information. And sometimes it's, you go to an actor and ask them like, hey, do you remember this thing? And frankly, at the end of the day, if you don't know, it is usually not the end of the world. That right there is one of those things that I get really fascinated by, depending on, is it a TV series? Is it a movie? Kind of like what you were saying, where people put their cares into versus what they don't, and both being equally important. Each thing that we end up working on, we always have that thing where you as a person and your experience, you're used to, say, looking for this, knowing to be on top of it or whatever. You might be working with someone who doesn't care about that, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop caring about it. And at the end of the day, as long as everyone has that respect for the position, where, like, to your point, you're saying, let me check. Like, I know where that should be that you're asking about, or where it likely is, and allowing that thing to happen. It's only when you get into sort of a disrespect, and it happens, it's not often, but it happens from time to time where, maybe someone's like, let's not worry about that, let's move on, or something like that. And it's like, well, I mean, I will to some extent disagree with that in terms of, I think every department on set wants whatever their craft is to be the best it can be. And this is why you hear kind of occasionally some animosity from, let's say, hair and makeup and costumes towards camera, grip, and electric. And there's this sentiment of camera G&E think that you're going to wait all day while hair, makeup, costumes get the actors ready. Meanwhile, hair, makeup, costumes thinks we got them to set really fast, and now they're telling us we don't have time for a last look, but we have time to light for 20 minutes. And what it is just everyone wants their job. Everyone wants every shot to be perfect as far as their department goes. At the same time, everyone wants the whole picture to work as well as it possibly can. And I think that is where the job of director earns their money, is they're the person who often has to make the decision and say, like, you know what, we need to move on, which might mean like, yeah, I know that the person had a flyaway hair, we're going to move on. Or they're saying to, a camera and electric, like, yeah, maybe that tree would look better with a rim light behind it. We don't have the time. And none of us ever want to hear that. We never want to hear like, sorry, your craft is not going to be perfect in that shot. To that end, I will almost never, like you mentioned the idea of like, one director might not care about this kind of continuity, but I can still care about it. And on the one hand, that's true, and I care. But on the other hand, it is their movie. And like what I tell every director when I do an entrance interview is like, look, I am never going to argue with you. It is not my job to make things match. It's not my job to make continuity. It is my job to alert the necessary people when it's not there. And then they get to make the decision. And what I'll say to a director is like, look, at the end of the day, I will not be offended by you telling me I don't care. I won't be offended by you telling me like, it's all right, no one will notice, because I don't have to sit in the editing room and my name's not on the poster.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like, sure, there's like the trolls on IMDb that will, say like, oh, look, like clearly the DP on this movie sucks because this angle, whatever. But they don't. I mean, for all you know, there was a second unit 6 months later. The idea that anyone is going to look at a movie and say like, "Ooh, I'm going to look up who the script supervisor was." The idea of anyone's going to look and say like, "I wonder who the script supervisor was because they clearly messed this up, and I never want to hire them." It just doesn't happen. So like, it's not that I don't care. Like, I really do. And like, if the director's particularly anal about wanting everything to match, or if an actor wants to be, exactly on everything, absolutely, I want to be there and provide them as much support as I possibly can. On the flip side, like, if a director doesn't care, then it is not my job to interfere with their laid back, free flow attitude by trying to force it to be as rigid as it might be with a director who does care. And I think that's a part of the adapting too. Yeah,
I would add to that and clarify that it's a layman maybe watching that's not going to know that, say, like Scripty, like you were saying, like your name's not on the poster kind of thing. Because as a crew person, I definitely hyper focus on, like, I have a habit where if I jump onto a TV series but I wasn't on it originally, I usually go back and watch what I haven't worked on.
I love that.
And then once I'm working, I'll probably never watch the show again because I don't need to. But I'll keep it nameless because it was bad, but they had fired the prop team off of a season 1 of a show. And then I came on season 2. And when I went back to watch season 1, girls are in a bathroom in a high school and they have backpacks on their shoulders. They have their makeup out. One's talking on a cell phone. And then you see them in the bathroom, and then the cutaway is them coming out of the bathroom. So you see them starting to leave, and then the next shot is them coming out the door. Everything has changed radically. Like, there's jewelry missing. The backpacks have changed shoulders. It was one of the most glaring continuity gaffes I've ever seen. And then I'm going, oh, I see. Maybe this is one of the reasons why they got canned. But I also know there's a lot of people, from point A to point B that should have had eyes on that. And so when I see it, I'm going like, ew, that's bad.
This is, so the most infamous like continuity mess up on TV history is that Starbucks cup in Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure you saw too online people saying like, well, props messed up. It's like, hold on. First off, the one department that did not mess up is props, because a Starbucks cup is never going to be a prop on Game of Thrones, obviously. But beyond that, like, for all we know, they did that wide, and maybe that shot with the coffee cup is a rehearsal. And they said, we're just going to roll on this rehearsal. And then they cut on it, and immediately the script supervisor went, oh, there's a coffee cup in the shot. And the camera operator said there's a coffee cup in the shot, and the on-set dresser said it, and the AD said it, and the actress looked down and said, sorry, there was a coffee cup in front of me. And everybody said it, all the people that were supposed to, and the DP should have noticed. Maybe they said it. And the director said, you know what? I'm never going to use that angle for that part of the scene. I think we're good. Let's move on. We got to make our day. And the script supervisor made a note for editorial saying coffee cup in this. And then in post, they sat down and they cut the scene and they didn't use that thing. And then at the last second, the producers looked at the cut and they went, you know what? We're really not seeing enough of the set. Like, why aren't we using that wide? Let's throw in that wide somewhere. And somebody put it in. The one person or department that we know made a mistake is quality control, which is the last people that watched the thing. For all we know, every single member of cast and crew did everything exactly right. So at the end of the day, like, I'm not by any means saying that it's okay to be sloppy and it's okay to mess up and to do things wrong. The idea of being upset or flustered or frustrated because other things are hindering you from getting it absolutely perfect is, for me at least, it's just a not healthy way to keep your sanity. It's, strive to do the best you can continuously, but there will be mistakes, and it's just your job to minimize them and just to learn and, roll with how to improve it.
Yeah, Game of Thrones, they were always on a shoestring budget, so that's probably, if only they had a post-production VFX department.
Well, exactly. How that got in there, it must have been a last-second decision.
I'm pretty sure most of that show was shot in Ireland, possibly Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Some of it.
Which I did not realize Starbucks was there, but I guess that makes sense.
Starbucks is
I guess it's everywhere.
You could shoot in Antarctica, where there's I saw
one
Starbucks science lab and a Starbucks.
Weird. But if I was, say, the owner of Starbucks, I would be like, hey, thanks for the free advertising.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit. Obviously, there's a lot more to your job than just continuity.
Sure.
Would you take a minute to kind of break down the different aspects of a script supervisor?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny you mentioned that, because I think by virtue of being a department of one, there's almost no one on set that actually knows what our job is. And so each department has their perspective of whether or not you're good at your job based on whether you're good at the one part they interact with. So camera thinks you're good at your job if you can tell them consistently what's on the slate. And editorial thinks you're good at your job if your notes are good. And most of the crew thinks you're good at your job if you can jump in really quick with a line when an actor yells line. And it's all of those are like shallow kind of like angles of what your job is, but none is the full picture. I would say when you first start on a job, you read the script, and the first thing you're doing is just looking through the script, identifying potential continuity errors, whether it's like 6 consecutive school days in a row, or something that doesn't make sense, in terms of history, or just narrative plot logic issues. And the first thing you're going to do is just bring those up. I advertise bringing them up in the context of a question. You're not saying this is wrong. You're asking, is it okay that she mentions this person, but she hasn't actually met them yet? And the director or producers or writers will respond. A lot of the time they say, that's fine, we don't mind, or they'll make changes. Then you time the script just to figure out how long roughly you think it will run. It matters a lot for TV and relatively little for movies. You're also on call. Just departments can call you with questions about continuity going in. You go through and figure out what scenes occur on which days of the story, which is primarily valuable for costumes, but also for art and props as well, in terms of, are people changing clothes between these 2 scenes? It's 2-day scenes. Are they on the same day, or did a week pass in between? So you're the one who's kind of doing the preliminary pass of figuring out the chronology of the script. And then you're on call to just answer questions about it. Once shooting starts, you have a couple of different jobs. Among them are, you're present for a rehearsal, so you can help make sure that everything you're shooting in that scene fits into the context of the movie at large. So that might be, a line or a piece of action is getting left out and it doesn't affect the scene, but 3 scenes later, there's going to be a piece missing by virtue of the fact that you dropped this line. So you're sitting there and you're just kind of chiming in, ideally as little as you can or as little as you have to make sure everything that you're going to shoot matches what's on the page or matches the overall needs of the story. Then you're conveying to camera and sound what to call any given scene or slate for the purposes of editorial being able to find it in post. Once you're rolling, you're taking notes on what any given shot is, what the differences between setups are, and within each setup, what the difference between takes are. You are also to some extent involved in conversations with the director and the DP and the AD about coverage. So what the various shots are that will ultimately make up this scene. And your purpose there, a big part of it is eyeline, which is kind of the geography of looks that allow disparate shots to cut together into a way that feels cohesive. So you're involved in making sure they get all the pieces they need. Often in that conversation, what you're doing is asking them, do you want an insert on this thing? Cell phones, and you're going to see a text message. Reminding them, do you want to get a shot of the text message on the cell phone? Beyond that, you've made these notes, you send them off to editorial, and then as you progress into a show, you're keeping track of what have you shot so far and what are the elements of it that need to be matched moving forward, so that as you get deeper and deeper into production, there's the puzzle is more and more complete. So the remaining pieces have to be more and more specific in order to fit into it. And you become kind of the main reference source for anybody else on the set, any other departments who might have questions. And it's we've talked about costumes and makeup. Also, actors though will come to you and ask, how long has it been since that scene where I'm crying, or is this the same day that my character quit his job? And so you're just there as a resource to answer those questions. In an ideal world, once the movie's done, you are effectively done. You turn in a big document of all your rap reports, and hopefully editorial never has any questions for you. But yeah, I think that's the bulk of what the job entails.
That's really cool. When you just said post there too, that's I got to give credit to Collier, that was a guest with this production office coordinator. he has this novel idea that there should be specific people from each department that is paid in advance, like 3 or 4 days, because the expectation is that you are likely to get called.
Sure.
And I love that idea because I don't think I can name you the last time I was not called after a show. And something's always going to come up. It's something's missing. It's out of place, and then you have to explain where it was. I just, the other day, somebody was going through wrap bins that we had left on a project we did a year ago. And for people listening, if you don't know, the long short is that everything that was important to the show gets put into containers and things, and it's all put away in case of reshoots. Long short there. So we got contacted and they said, here's some screenshots. We're looking for this football. And I said, well, you should have that football because it was a hero piece. So the main guy was holding it and posing with it and everything. And they said, well, I don't see it in here. And then I said, well, hold on, let me go look. So I go and I go back into the inventory list that was turned in and everything. And I realized it's not in there. It's not on the list or anything. So then I have to turn and say to my team, does anyone remember what happened with the football and why it wasn't put in there? And the answer that comes back to me is the director took it.
Amazing.
So then I have to turn back and say, so apparently the director took it. And then the response I got was, well, that's funny because the director's asking for it. And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you then other than it's a Wilson. It's a professional size. And I'll give you some more reference photos for it. I believe it was purchased at Academy Sports. I don't know what else to tell you, but that's the kind of stuff this is one example of many of the kind of calls that we can get after a show. And there's always kind of like a courtesy. That's maybe a good question for you is like, I always feel like there's kind of a grace courtesy, like you're kind of allowed like 3 questions maybe before I'll start going like, all right, guys, this is starting to get a little excessive, kind of thing.
So where it's more of an issue for script supervisors than in post is in prep. Is, because you're technically, I might get a week of prep time on a movie. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's a little longer. But in a way, that week is sort of stretched out across several weeks. Like my first day is probably, a couple weeks before production. I do my preliminary breakdown. But then costumes is all on the clock and like they're working, they're in the office consistently, they're buying, they're trying things on, they're figuring out the look. I, for the most part, am not. And they're not going to have me sitting in the office in case someone has a question. It doesn't make sense. But when someone does have a question, I'm going to get a call. And I generally am very, amicable about it. I'm happy to hop on the phone, even though I'm not on the clock technically this day. But like you said, like there's a window. And it's a little tricky, and I think this is a tricky thing for all of us by virtue of the fact that we basically do gig work. For us in gig work, we do all want to nurture relationships, and the last thing any of us want is to be viewed as like, oh, well, that person's really difficult to work with. Like, they won't answer the phone unless they're on the clock. Like they're very, just demanding. But we also need to be respectful to ourselves and set boundaries of what is and isn't appropriate to expect from us when we are not being paid to work.
Yes. We're definitely in an industry that it's a yin and a yang. I should say it that way. It's a two-way street of give and take because everyone is going to try and give an inch, take a mile. And that is, you could be talking about the crew member, you could be talking about the producer. It's everyone vying for that time. And I think you're right. You do have to kind of respect yourself and your craft,
Interestingly, I think that goes back to something we were saying a minute ago about like all the departments collaborating on set. I think there's a really interesting push-pull of every department wants their craft to be perfect. And if I'm a producer or I'm a director, I want to hire the art team that has the most amazing, like rigorous attention to detail and delivers the most like rich, complex sets they can. But also, I want to hire the art team that slots in really well with everybody else and gets along with the rest of the crew and everybody gels. And like, I don't want to hire the team that we're perpetually waiting on because they won't compromise on anything. And I think for all of us, for me, a script supervisor with continuity, I don't want to fight for everything to be perfect. And frankly, you get a sense too with certain actors, certain directors that like you're going to be able to ask them maybe 1 or 2 questions every scene and you don't want to push beyond that. You don't want to waste their patience asking questions about a thing that isn't going to matter, because then it's going to make them listen to you less when it does matter. So I think it's interesting trying to modulate like attention to detail versus staying out of the way and allowing everyone else to do their craft to the best of their ability.
Also, that's what notes are for, right? I mean, at least in our world, when things go to post-production and we get phone calls after that period, most of the time, the information that they're trying to gather is things that would have been or should have been in the notes,
Absolutely.
So if it could either be a matter of we're just not taking good enough notes, or they're not reading them or not finding them, so. Yeah.
And to some extent, I imagine for sound, definitely for me, some notes are just like cover your ass notes.
Yeah.
It's notes like
the director took the football.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. We know that there is a plane. We know that there is a second line going by outside.
Yeah.
The director's okay with it. There,
Yeah.
we've noted it. And now when in post they go, oh shit, what do we do? There's a second line in the background. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's why the director gets the big bucks. They now have to solve that.
Yeah.
Or the location department needs to figure out how to financially compensate that second line to shut up so we can record. And that's a whole other conversation with the location department, which when we had Jimmy on, I really wanted to get into it, but we didn't. But I'm so wanting to know
the payoffs,
the seedy underworld that they have to deal with. But I don't know if they want that really out there, but because everyone's got their own methods and they got their own, contacts and everything like that. But
how much can I ask to make you stop me from mowing my lawn?
Yeah, the guy's out using a blower, but he doesn't have any leaves. It's pretty obvious what he's doing right now.
Waiting for a payoff.
Yeah, right. As we start to wind down, a few more things I wanted to ask you. One of the things that I kind of wish I was asking people sooner about this, but I think it's important that we start asking everybody. But for you, as you got into script supervising, what is it that you find the most attractive about your job? And what are the things that you get the most satisfaction out of, or the things that you love the most about your job?
Sure. I love that question. For me, I think script supervising is a phenomenal in to anyone if you want to write or direct, and I am a writer and I am a director as well. And for me, when I first got into script supervising, the mentality was largely, I want to sit next to the director. I want to wear context. I want to hear what the actors are saying. I want to be involved in the discussions of what we are shooting and why. I want to be in the middle of the conversation between the writers and the producers and director, just by virtue of I want to have as much exposure as possible to all of these different elements of production. I think it's an amazing way to learn. Now, I've been very lucky and had a fair degree of success writing and directing, but still to me, script supervising is the best continuing education there is. I think there's a huge problem for script supervisors as well, also for directors, basically any department that is a one-person department. A huge problem is that so many of them have never worked with anyone else who does their job. We've all worked with directors who they directed a short film and now they're directing a multi-million-dollar movie and they have no experience. And worse, aside from maybe they listen to some DVD commentaries or watch some videos on YouTube, they don't know how to direct. They know the way they instinctively direct, but they've never been on a set with another director watching that person direct. So for me, I think script supervising is a great way to just I keep my head out of my own ass about how directors work with their teams. And it trickles back too, I came up through ADing, and I think that was an invaluable experience in terms of making me a competent script supervisor. I got to watch dozens of script supervisors, many of whom are amazing, some of whom had some major problems in the way they did their job. And I got to learn from good and bad. And I think that experience is invaluable. I think there's so much to be gained by doing other jobs. So for me, script supervising, I love that I have such a thorough involvement with so many aspects of production, which on the one hand gives me a great sense of satisfaction when I see it come together in the final cut, but also just informs, I'm a better writer now by virtue of having sat through so many discussions and so many explorations of how to make a scene work. So I get tremendous satisfaction from that. Beyond that, I think going back to the soccer analogy, there is some glory in being the person that catches the thing and that notices a problem and flags it. However, I think there's satisfaction in doing that invisibly. I think so much of script supervising is telling people that they've made a mistake. It's telling costumes that they're in the wrong shirt, or telling an actor that they've said the line wrong, or telling, camera that we're on the wrong side of the eye line. I think by virtue of that, a lot of departments get frustrated with script supervisors because nobody likes being told that they've made a mistake. I think what's invaluable for aspiring script supervisors, and frankly for everybody on set, is to give notes in a way that allows the person you're giving the notes to save face. And I think a lot of times that's a matter of asking something as a question, of saying, is that the shirt that she had on the other day? You know the answer. But what you're allowing is you're allowing the person you're asking it to be the person who recognizes the problem and fix it without being embarrassed. Also giving notes or pointing something out privately or quietly, or just going to the right person with it rather than, asking a producer if it's okay that the prop is not the same football as the previous thing. So to me, there's a great sense of satisfaction when you feel like the crew is comfortable and cast coming to you with questions or concerns that might be embarrassing for them and isn't nervous or preemptively angry when you walk up to them and they know you're going to give them a note, when they are comfortable because it's a dialogue and you're all on the same team. That to me is a phenomenally satisfying feeling.
That's that not only is that cool, but you also brought up two things that now I have a question and comment. I love that having tact to ask in the form of a question that's really smart, because I definitely experienced what you're talking about, where it sounds like, you're basically being told you screwed up. And I try very hard, because we're in a universe now where no one wants to be accountable anymore. So I try very hard to be accountable when I know I've made a mistake. My number one mistake that I have made, probably the most consistent, is when I get into a pattern, a routine with an actor, and then they break that routine with me, and it messes with me. Because if I'm point on set, maybe it's a wedding band, and maybe for 3 straight weeks, we break for lunch, and that actor says, no, I'll just leave it on. And I go, that's fine. And at the end of the night, I'll get it. And at the beginning of the next day, I'll give it back to him. I'll put him on. If that actor randomly takes it off and doesn't tell me or something like that, and it has happened definitely to me more than once, where I'm watching the monitor, I'm watching, the one in my head is a dinner scene. And so it's the whole family there, including the wife, theoretically. And I'm like, something doesn't feel right here. And I'm like looking around, and then I'm going like, he doesn't have his ring on. Why? No. And then now I'm running out to the cart, and I'm looking, and I have to wait till the take is over. And I'm going to the actor. I'm like, hey, to me not to panic, but instead I'm going, hey there, buddy. Do you know where your ring's at? Oh, I think I put it on your cart. And it's like, thanks for that. And, now I'm running. Then I have to come over to Scripty. Then I have to say, okay, so that last take, he didn't have the ring on. I'm putting the ring on for this next take. Sorry about that. And I'll just accept it's my fault, even though, maybe in that scenario, it was the actor breaking a routine with me. But I still, it puts you in a panic,
It does. It's the worst feeling in the world. The closest for me is, and I mentioned this earlier, is if an actor's flawless on their lines all the time, you stop worrying about staying on script with them because you know they're going to deliver. It was Aaron Eckert, who is he's a pro. Like, Aaron's an excellent actor. I was on set with him. It's on day 18 of a 5-week shoot or something. And he's never not known his line. And we're in the middle of this very emotional, traumatic scene. And, the big changes in the way the background we're positioning, and one of the cameras was doing a different move. And I'm making a whole bunch of notes very quickly about all these things. And I hear Aaron yell out line. And I'm like, it's the worst feeling in the world. Your stomach drops. You're like, oh, I've made a mistake. And he's just standing there, like, very emotional. And he's kind of method. And he's like, come on, somebody. And I'm panicking inside, which is the same feeling. Is like, if you notice that an actor has come to set in the wrong shirt, if you're costumes, they've come to set in the wrong shirt. Okay, it's embarrassing to say, hey, sorry, we got to bring them back to base. We got to change their shirt. If you've already done 3 setups of coverage, it's horrifying. It's like going and admitting that you ran over someone's dog is what it feels like. To that end, I think you're talking taking responsibility for your mistakes. It is your mistake, like your props, and you should have noticed. Yeah. There's reasons you didn't. And it's the actor's mistake for not putting it back on. It's also the script supervisor's mistake for not catching it on take 1. But everyone's focused on other stuff. The actor's in their head about how to perform the scene. Hopefully that's the reason they messed up. And you are focusing on things that are bigger priorities because you know that this is something you can count on. And same thing for me as script supervisor. Taking accountability for it is amazing. And if you really want people to just love you, taking accountability for other people's mistakes is, provided it's not something that's going to get you fired. But like if costumes comes to me and says like, hey, we just realized that she doesn't have the jacket on. For me to then go to the director, because I do think usually the director needs to know if it's going to impact things, is I'll go to the director and say, hey, I'm so sorry I didn't catch this, but the jacket wasn't on for this last scene. Yes, obviously it's costume's fault as well, but like what I'm doing is like lessening the blow for them, and it's not in a way that's really going to hurt me. So like if you come to me and say, hey, look, the wedding ring wasn't on since we came back from lunch, the wedding ring hasn't been there. What I'll often do to tell the director is, hey, just so you know, we just noticed the actor's wedding ring wasn't on. So we haven't done anything close on them. It might be noticeable in the wide. Also, we only see their hand for the beginning of this shot, and you may be into coverage by the time it would have become noticeable. Do you want to go again? Or do you want to reset for that? Is presenting the problem along with like some information that lessens it and with some like potential solutions and ways to move forward. I think it's just a way to, help nobody have a heart attack.
Yeah. And actually using that scene as an example, just for people listening. So if you imagine that there's a dinner scene and it's a family dinner, and let's say it's at the top of the meal, meaning that some people are still sitting. Maybe someone takes off a sweater jacket and puts it on their chair. People are still putting a salad bowl down. People start serving themselves. 2 people are eating, 2 people are talking. 1 person's filling a glass of wine. There's so much happening in that. And again, you have hair, makeup, costumes, props, the on-set dresser looking at the set decoration, and then you have Scripty looking at all of it. Just that one example, there's so much business happening in that. Mm-hmm. And kind of going back to what we talked about before, that is a lot for one person to be keeping an eye on everything. And using that soccer example again, I think that's a wonderful example. That is where you really are leaning on everyone to be looking at their specific, responsibilities. And so on that day, I'm so hyper focused on the food that it took me a minute to realize that he didn't have the ring on. And that's what kills me, is because I'm hyper focusing on what I just spent the last hour getting ready, because food is the bane of props existence, at least for me. But it's a very precarious thing when you're dealing with food and you're dealing with actor diets, you're dealing with all this, blah, blah. Something trivial, seemingly, like a ring, is what will get kind of to the wayside. And that's where I'll kick myself, because I'm like, I was so focused over here that I missed the little one. So, but, the other thing is, the sooner you catch it, the sooner that, luckily we were in a master. Yeah. So we had just started it. So I was lucky in that. It wasn't like it's been 7 takes and we're in coverage, that's much worse.
What's also, I think, something to tell ourselves to feel better about it is, even if there's an egregious error, 99% of people watching will not notice. Like, obviously we should try to make it as good as we possibly can. But at the end of the day, there's a Scorsese quote. Scorsese movies have notoriously terrible physical continuity. I say notoriously, most people don't know that. They've never noticed. Pay attention to like where props are and where hands are and how things look in The Departed. It's all over the place. And Scorsese has said, like, emotional continuity trumps physical continuity every time. In the editing room, they're not, hopefully, the editor is not cutting based on when the person in the background was taking a bite of salad. They're cutting based on when the actor's performances feel the most genuine, and when, a cut to the other person is going to give us the most sense of satisfaction narratively. So like when we tell a director, hey, the wedding ring's missing, or hey, the pitcher of water is in the wrong spot on the table, often I think good directors will say, that's okay. And the reason is, we're sitting there and we're looking at like Reese Witherspoon's face as she says, an emotional thing. If we're looking at the pitcher of water on the table, something's already very wrong with the performance or the script or the edit. That said, we still want to try and get it as good as it can be. But at the end of the day, like, hopefully, I mean, there's always some crazy person on IMDb that we all hate because they go in goofs and they're like, the water pitcher rotated.
There's an entire section
Yeah.
dedicated to that.
And often
Drives me nuts.
what they say are goofs. You're like, it's not a goof. Like, I mean, what also happens is we'll shoot a scene that's 3 pages long and would be 3 minutes of screen time. And then in the edit, they go, you know what? This is too long. We're going to cut out 6 lines from the middle. But during that 6 lines, a bunch of stuff moved around. You know what? They're going to cut it anyway, because anybody who's tracking where the bottles are on the table is not the audience member that they're catering to.
Yeah, and because you just made me think of it, to have worked in this industry prior to the invention of the pause button in the home video world. That's wow.
Yeah,
that's something to think about. Well, I want to wind us down, but before we get out of here, we have one question. Well, first of all, I want to say again, thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for putting up with the amazing amount of traffic that we've had today.
Oh, no worries.
But the question that we like to kind of end on with everyone is any advice or wisdom that you'd like to impart on anyone listening. It can be good or bad. We do have a soapbox that you can stand on if you need. If you would like to vent, teach, preach, whatever you'd like to close with, it's kind of your open mic to say whatever you'd like.
Yeah, I think sticking with a lot of what we've talked about thematically, right, for continuity's sake.
Hey.
I would say yes, on the one hand, like having tact is great. And, you know, approaching anyone in a way that lets them save face and lets them feel good and like minimizes the degree to which they feel like they made a mistake is awesome. And everyone should be tactful in that way. The flip side of that is I'm a huge proponent of giving people the benefit of the doubt when they don't act that way. Like there is behavior we shouldn't accept. Like there's abusive behavior and that's never okay. Or exploitative behavior is not okay. But I think there's value in like if someone says something to you in a way that sounds obnoxious or sounds like they're an asshole, giving them the most benefit of the doubt of saying like if I'm approaching somebody to give them a note on set and they instantly go defensive, like for all I know, the last show they were on, the script supervisor, you know, embarrassed them repeatedly and they got screamed at or fired by a producer because the script supervisor was overly anal about something that didn't matter. For all I know, that's the background that they're walking into that situation with. And for me to then respond to their defensive-ness by, you know, fighting back is so counterproductive and it just reinforces that problem. Or it's as simple as they like, you know, their kid is sick or whatever. I'm just such a proponent of let people, like just don't respond to anger with anger. And I get it. I get that feels like you're not respecting yourself by letting someone be rude to you. I mean, where I see this a lot is with directors being dismissive of a thing. And for any of us, whether it's I tell a director, hey, so you know, we saw a C-stand in the background of that shot, and they kind of wave dismissively, go, yeah, I don't care. Like on the one hand, that feels insulting. It feels like they're saying you do not have value here. On the other hand, there's 1,000 things going on in their head. And they're worried because an actor's grumpy about something and they think they might be fired because blah, 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 blah. For me personally, like I can sleep better if I just assume that their rudeness and anger was not about me. It was about other circumstances and just don't worry about it. So that is my preachy. I wish I started in the industry on some movies that were underfunded and there was very much a sense of like animosity between departments. Like I was an AD and a PA and I was such an asshole because I think the way I kind of learned was like, we're trying to make this movie despite the camera department who's taking forever. We're trying to make it despite these difficult actors. And it's like, no, at the end of the day, like we all do an art form that pays fairly well, that involves getting to collaborate with a whole bunch of like very diverse geniuses. That's awesome. And let's just like have fun being as collaborative as possible. And when people aren't, I mean, that's their loss. I feel bad for them, but internalizing it and making it my, you know, problem is just so counterproductive. So that is my preachy soapbox. I
think that is a wonderful statement. And I would, I guess, adding to what you said, it's luckily it's sort of a dying world of it's kind of a more old school thing of the kind of a abusive world that you kind of mentioned. Luckily, is seemingly less and less. I think for those of us that have been in the industry for a while, like I have to get over my own PTSD from being around those people earlier in my career and not acting like that with people below me. It's kind of like, a buck stops here sort of thing, that you want that behavior to stop. And there's still people that they operate that way because that's how they were basically trained. It's kind of like the classic stereotype of the asshole first AD, and then that's how they're also talking to their own department. And then those PAs one day become ADs, and now they're behaving like what they, mom and dad did it that way.
Absolutely. I am of the mentality, this is like me directing as well. Like, I think if you have to yell at somebody, and there are reasons to yell on set, basically safety is the reason to yell on set.
Don't touch that live wire.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason to yell. Other than that,
Why is there a live wire?
If you want to yell at people on set, the person you want to yell at, if it's important enough for you to yell at them or for you to like chastise them or humiliate them or whatever, instead fire them. If it's at a point where they're doing something so problematic that the acceptable way to address it is by being cruel, then the first step you should be taking is to fire them, because they don't belong there. And you should do it privately and do it to the side. The moment that somebody is, being abusive in front of people, the person being abusive is losing. And yeah, you see it with ADs often. It's department heads largely. And I think you're right. It comes from a place of they grew up in that environment. But I would hope people learn, I grew up like this and it sucked, and now I'm going to handle it differently.
Yeah, I think a lot of us grew up with fairly normal households. And so to have kind of a normal, quote unquote, parents world, then to go into this world. And I, over the years, have seen more adult tantrums than I knew were possible. And it's jarring at first. Like I remember we used to have a position that's kind of disappeared. We're trying to get it back in a different way, but we used to have a prop position that was the truck position. And the long short is that you were kind of facilitating what's coming into the truck and what's going out of the truck.
A best boy for props.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And I remember a prop master coming on his own truck, and he was looking for something, he couldn't find it. So his answer to that was to rip everything off shelves, dumping it, and screaming while it's happening, and then basically leaving for me to clean it all up, and basically telling me to organize better. And I'm just standing there for a second, like, what just happened kind of thing. Like, I mean, it's it's like a slap in the face kind of thing, because you're just not used to it,
No, yeah. I feel fortunate that my brain doesn't work like that. Like, I'm glad that I'm not the kind of person who channels my frustration into making my own life more difficult by destroying my prop truck. Yeah. Like, what a sad life that must be.
That's his stuff.
Yeah.
That's the thing I couldn't. Yeah. That's like me going into my own living room, trashing it, and then being mad because something ultimately that I had out of place wasn't in the right place. It's so hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah. At the same time, I guess I should clarify too. Like, if that happened to me, or if a director does something like really unacceptable, is takes my chair or takes my laptop and throws it on the ground because they're upset. I am not advocating that you have to just take it because be the better person.
Yeah.
By all means, if someone does something that's abusive, report it. Like, go up the appropriate channels. But just like responding with anger or aggression or in any way is just so counterproductive.
Yeah. It is. But again, let's be grateful that is hopefully dying out, because we have certainly been seeing it less and less.
Thank God.
Well, thank you so much, David, for coming by today. Once again, we have some background talk.
Love it.
I keep waiting for Marvin Gaye to kick in with some mother.
David, did you have anything you want to plug by chance?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
Anything you're working on project-wise, personal?
That's a good question. I didn't think about that.
I've got a couple of scripts that we're doing revisions right now on. I can't talk too much about them.
Do they involve zombies?
They do not, but that's something I don't want the producers I'm doing these rewrites for to hear, because now they'll say like, ooh, he makes a good point. What if there were zombies?
Well, I feel like ghosts are making their way back into the popular thing. Zombies are kind of on the way out. Pirates are still dead for a while, but yeah, ghosts, it feels like ghosts are the next thing.
Yeah, I think ghost zombies that's what Lord of the Rings did, right? By the end of it.
Yeah.
And it worked. It did okay. So yeah, I've got a couple projects in the works from a writing perspective. there's some interesting stuff coming up for me, script supervising wise. Here's the thing I haven't plugged at all. This is new. I overcame very slightly my technological ineptness and made a website for myself,
Nice.
which I will plug. It's davidxbush.com, X as in X-ray. And through that site, for a while now, a few years ago, I started doing like a quarterly newsletter that I literally just put my entire contact list into this thing and started sending it out just through Gmail. Now it's through this website. And what that contains is usually just, a very quick update of like stuff I'm seeing professionally and in the world. And then a bunch of recommendations for things, whether it's, like useful productivity tips or writing tools or movies to check out or people doing exciting things. Or podcasts to listen to, hashtag this one. Anyway, so yeah, I now have that newsletter quarterly through davidxbush.com.
That's really cool.
Very cool.
So plugged.
Yeah. Sweet. Thank you.
And thank you, Justin, for asking that. Well, thank you, David, for coming in. Thank you for enduring, like I said, the ambient noise today. It's been interesting.
Of course, it happened in the continuity episode of all episodes.
I know. Oh God, I didn't even think about
It's
that.
insane.
It would have been good in a locations episode also, or a sound episode. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
Oh my God. But yeah, thank you so much for coming in today, and hopefully see you on set soon.
Awesome. I hope so. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks, David.
Yay. All right. Thank you again, David. That was awesome. And I even positions that I feel like I have a good handle on, or I feel like I know a good amount, I'm endlessly surprised at how much I don't know. And that's one of the fun things about interviews on this, is that you just keep learning more and more and more. And David specifically, I love some of his analogies. The soccer analogy was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And it does take a village. I mean, because you need that many eyes to be watching all of these things to kind of make sure they're on check, such as a background guy with a broom in the air. That I'm just going to keep bringing up. I guess before I mention the other thing, for you, I mean, in sound, world, I didn't know how much in the continuity world, like, you've ever had to pay attention, or as far as like, maybe actor lines.
Yeah, sound will definitely want to know, if there's some major changes in lines or anything like that. Yeah, there's that interaction. And then another big one is when we need to record what they call wild lines on set. And that's when they want to record lines that an actor says without any camera business going on. So no video being recorded or anything like that. We will let the script supervisor know that we're doing that so that they can put it in their notes and, post has that information, kind of thing.
Right. And I just wanted to add to that, and then you tell me if I'm wrong. All right. But the number one reason that you need a wild line is because, for whatever reason, in the recording of the scene, there was some other noise or something like that you didn't get a clear recording of the line, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could be intentional or not intentional. It could be just like, they have four-wheelers going off in the background, but we need this line, for that scene, but we want it clean.
Or we're shooting on a, quote, I'm going to use rabbit ears that you can't see me doing, a stage, which is really just a shitty tin can roof, and it's storming. Yeah. And the sound department's miserable.
Yeah.
And you're going to need a lot of wild lines. Probably.
A lot of wild lines. And that's to avoid... that's to avoid ADR, which is automatic dialogue replacement. That's a very expensive way to replace dialogue in a movie. It's technically bringing an actor in after the movie has been shot into a studio and re-recording their lines.
Which, interesting you bring that up, because shout out to How Did This Get Made? One of the things that I haven't given a lot of thought to until I started listening to that podcast a lot, here it is. These are three actors that are hosting this podcast. They talk a lot about ADR because they're quick to notice when something's out of place in a movie, where they're like, you can tell that the guy's mouth is not moving correctly with it, or that they'll point out, you can tell that this was something added later, ADR. Right. Like they're calling attention to something that maybe you would maybe pick up on as a sound guy. And maybe not as readily picking up on it unless I notice a mouth isn't moving. I can probably tell that. Yeah. But they are so much more, as actors, they're just so much more fine-tuned to noticing when, say, the sound quality isn't matching, smoothly. Sure. So you can tell that there's, and it's interesting, since I started noticing what they're pointing out, it does become more apparent. Yeah. It's that, there's a name for the phenomenon, but it's that thing of like you buy a new car and then you see your car everywhere. Yeah. Whatever you call that. Wild Lines is an interesting one for sure. That Scripty has so many responsibilities and things, and we didn't get to talk about it in the interview with David, but the director chairs at Village Props is the wrangler of those chairs, at least in the United States. Other countries have different systems. But at the end of the night, Scripty is there doing their reports, and they're basically playing catch up, because now that the day is over, they can get their notes together that they got to send off, and we're packing up chairs and things like that. And we, as a prop department,
I know exactly where this is going.
Well, we as a prop department have a lot of jokes, and we sometimes I've seen different prop people do different things, but one of my favorites is I'll keep them nameless, but there's a prop person that will go find a folding chair that's maybe from, an extras tent or something like that. And they'll just very passive aggressively leave it there as a hint for the script supervisor to move to that chair. Yeah. But it's interesting because I've seen a lot of jokes over the years, and David's not too bad about it. Actually, I can vouch for him. And
I do know, to be clear, I know a couple of scripties who bring their own chairs.
Yes,
and they're not all the culprits.
Yeah, and some are quick to move and cognizant of us. But like when I was younger and lower in the department, my bosses would be like, just go stand there. Go stand over their shoulder, get in their personal space, because their mentality is like, we're trying to get out of here. But the older I got and the longer that I've done props, my whole thinking kind of flip-flopped, where I'm like, why am I in a rush?
Yeah.
I have a complete justification for why I can't get off the clock. Mm-hmm. And if a UPM line producer, unit production manager, money people, if they're saying like, hey, why did it take you guys 30 minutes, longer to get out than it should have? Well, script supervisor was in the chair, they looked like they were pretty serious, didn't want to mess with them or something like that. But it doesn't really come up. I mean, it's right. I just learned that it's a thing. It's like some self-imposed rule that some older prop masters put down, that it really doesn't matter. I mean, now granted, we might be tired and want to go home. That's a whole other conversation, because then it's like, yeah, I'm trying to get off the clock, because maybe we're shooting like on the edge of our territory and you got like a 30-minute drive to get home, or LA people are laughing at me right now. Uh-huh. I'll say an hour drive to get home. That makes it a little better. We're lazy here in New Orleans. But yeah, it's like, it's not as big of a deal as some people have made it out to be in the past. And it's kind of a funny thing about the chairs at Village, and there's all kinds of politics that can go into it and everything. And we didn't have enough time with David, but I did want to go into script supervisor is a unique position that technically is below the line, but it's almost like they have a foot and above the line and below the line, because they're the only below the line person that can sit in a director's chair at Village technically, even though no one abides by these rules in modern filmmaking, and yet we're somehow told to be the police of these chairs that we don't want to deal with. Mm-hmm. I would say if I had to rank things I hate in props, I would put chairs at 1, food at 2. Yeah. But it's a yin and a yang. I don't hate all of it, but yeah, it's a funny world, because the chair thing has just been a weird thing over the years. And I just wanted to get David's perspective on it. So unfortunately we ran out of time, thanks to so many parades. But
I also forgot to ask him something about call signs. Oh. So sound mixers, when when we do new setups, right? New camera setups, those we name those things on a slate differently each time, right? So if we're shooting scene 22, the first time we shoot that, it'll be scene 22, take one, right? If we do a new camera angle on that, we go to 22A or 22 Apple is one of the most common call signs, right? Take one, take two, whatever. New setup, 22 Baker, beta, whatever. So I like to have fun with call signs. I know a few other mixers in town that like to have fun with the call signs. You know, sometimes they'll do.
God forbid we try to have fun.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes they'll do, characters' names in the show, and other things that are maybe related to the story of the show. And
that's cool.
Like that, yeah. So I wanted to ask him how he actually felt about that. If he was more of a fan of the traditional Apple, Baker, Charlie, military call sign kind of deal, or if he'd rather hear a more fun version.
That is an interesting thing you bring up, because for me, like, I hear these things, I have like a cursory knowledge of what they are, just time and osmosis, kind of thing. But it's not something I give a lot of thought to, because it doesn't typically apply. Sometimes when we're doing our continuity photos, that we take every scene theoretically if we're doing our jobs. But one of the things that some prop people will do is that they'll photograph the slate, whether it's in the monitor or it's just in person. They have a good vantage point of it. Yeah. But they'll basically use the slate to slate the photos that are coming. And so that's one of the ways. I'm lazy. I'll take my sides, which is go back to... I can't remember what episode that was, but the small pieces of paper that have all the lines for the day on it. I'll flip it over to the backside, and I'll just lazily write like scene 53. And if I have time or if I'm having fun on the show, I'll make a dumb description that's very brief. Where it'll be like where Charlie finds his car. Yeah. And that'll be like, a very, very crude way of saying what the scene is. Yeah. And then I'll photograph that, and then I'll do the photos. But, sure. Yeah. But it's also, that's meant strictly for us. No one is typically going to see that.
Right. Yeah. We do the call signs, and most people that are, or at least everybody that is wearing Comtex on set will hear that. And then the post-production team will also hear that. Oh. So it is kind of a thing where it's like, you be a little bit careful with it. You don't want to, you don't want to break tradition too much. But also, what's it going to hurt, really?
Yeah. No, I like that. Anything to have fun, in my mind, be professional at the same time. But it's like, we have to get reminded sometimes that we work in the entertainment industry. Yeah. And why not have fun with our jobs? Yeah. There's all these not famous quotes, but inside of our crew world, you'll hear, people going like, hey, don't forget we're making movies, that kind of stuff. And it's true. I think
we're not saving lives.
Yeah, we're not saving lives. Unless it's Super Mario Brothers 3. Yeah. Or 3. Why did I say 3? 1993 Super Mario Brothers. When you put on the raccoon costume and you go flying, you know what I mean? Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, let's see. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, those other 3 clowns, they missed out today. But, oh my God, speaking of clowns, look at who's walking in. Look like he came straight from a hole. All right, Zoe, come on, do your thing.
1, 2, better not sue. We want to hear from you, the audience. Do you have a behind-the-scenes story? Maybe you work in the industry, or maybe you had a run-in with production. You live in New Orleans, New York, whatever, and some PA stopped you on the way to work and it was annoying. We want to hear about it. We want to hear about all of it. We love all the stories. Write us and maybe we'll read it on the show. Or maybe you just want to tell us that you love us or you really hate us and you want to fact check us because we're wrong about a lot of things. You can troll us, whatever you want to do. You might even want to guess where Joe or Chris are on any given day of the week. You can do that by emailing us at filmfolklorepodcast@gmail.com. It's filmfolklorepodcast@gmail.com. We do indeed want to hear from you. You can also find us on the social media. Instagram is Film Folklore Podcast. Facebook group is Film Folklore. Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, @The Film Folk. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us. We really want to hear from you. It's very important to us. Again, we work in the entertainment business, so we need a lot of validation. We're very pathetic, sad people, and we really want to be reviewed. We want to know your honest opinion. It means a lot to us because you guys mean a lot to us. And for any of you that really like us and have some change burning holes in your pockets and just any money at all, like a credit card, we set up a donation with PayPal and Patreon. Links are in the show notes of this episode and our website. Money helps us do more fun things, and we want to entertain you. Money helps you do more fun things, which helps us do more fun things, which is also helping you have fun. And it would be really nice. And we love you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.